She stays home with the kids. That's how my husband introduced me to a room full of 200 people wearing suits that cost more than our mortgage payment. He said it the way you describe a piece of furniture. Functional. Ordinary. Nothing worth looking at twice. What he didn't know was that 3 of those people in that room already knew my name, and by the end of the night, every single one of them would too. My name is Vanessa Caldwell. I'm 36 years old. And for the last 4 years, my husband, Derek, has believed that I spend my days folding laundry, watching cooking shows, and waiting for him to come home and tell me about his real job. He wasn't entirely wrong. I do fold laundry. I'm actually pretty fast at it. But between the hours of 9:15 a.m. and 2:40 p.m., while our 2 kids are at school, I run a consulting firm called Ashworth Strategic Partners. We specialize in operational restructuring for mid-sized companies. We have 14 employees, 3 of whom have MBAs from Wharton. Last fiscal year, our revenue crossed $22 million. I built the entire thing from my kitchen table while my husband thought I was clipping coupons. Let me go back. Because people always ask me the same question, why didn't you just tell him? And the answer is complicated. Or maybe it's simple. Maybe the answer is that he never once asked. Derek and I got married in 2014. I was 24. He was 27. He just started at Whitmore and Kessler, a mid-tier financial advisory firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was proud of that job the way some men are proud of their first car. It wasn't the best, but it was his, and he wanted everyone to know it. I was finishing my MBA at Wake Forest. I had 3 months left. 2 weeks before our wedding, he sat me down on the couch, the beige one we'd bought from a clearance sale at a furniture outlet, and he said something I'll never forget. Vanessa, when we have kids, I don't want them raised by strangers. I want you to be there. I'll handle everything else. I remember the way he said it, like it was a gift, like he was offering me something precious. And at the time, maybe it felt that way. I was tired. The MBA program had drained me. I'd been working 70-hour weeks at an internship that barely paid for gas. The idea of someone saying I'll handle everything, just rest, felt like oxygen. So I said okay. I finished my degree, walked at graduation, and then I put my diploma in a drawer. Literally. It sat in our filing cabinet between our car insurance documents and a takeout menu from a Thai restaurant that had already closed. Derek never mentioned it again. Our first daughter, Mila, was born in 2016. She came 2 weeks early, at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I remember Derek calling his mother from the hospital hallway while I was still being stitched up. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, he said. She looks just like me. He said that before he'd even held her. Our son, Caleb, came in 2018. By then, I'd already started to disappear. Not physically. I was everywhere. I was at every pediatrician appointment, every grocery store trip, every 2 a.m. feeding where the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming from 2 rooms away. I was always there. But being present and being seen are 2 completely different things. There was a moment, sometime in 2019, that I think about more than I should. Derek's team had won some kind of internal award at work. A plaque. They were going to dinner at a steakhouse downtown to celebrate. He asked me to come. I got dressed. I hired a babysitter. I curled my hair for the first time in months. When we got to the restaurant, Derek introduced me to his colleagues, a table of 8 people who all seemed to know each other's kids' names and vacation schedules. "This is Vanessa," he said, pulling out my chair. "She's home with the kids." One of the wives looked at me and said, "Oh, that's so nice. I wish I could do that."
She meant it as a compliment.
I know she did. But the word that sat in my chest like a stone.
That.
Like staying home was a hobby. Like my entire existence could be summarized in a pronoun. I remember one night, driving home from one of those dinners, Derek was on the phone with a colleague, laughing about something that had happened after dessert. I was in the passenger seat, staring out the window. The highway lights passed over the dashboard in orange pulses. When he hung up, he said, "That was a great night." I said, "Yeah." He didn't ask me what I thought. He turned on sports radio and drove the rest of the way home with one hand on the wheel and the other reaching for his phone every time it buzzed. I sat there wondering when exactly I'd become furniture. And somewhere between the sleep deprivation and the diaper changes and the goldfish cracker crumbs that permanently lived in my car seats, I became invisible. Not to my kids. To everyone else. At dinner parties, people would smile at me politely and then turn back to Derek. I was the woman whose name people forgot by the time they got to the parking lot. Derek moved up at Whitmore and Kessler. He became a senior analyst, then a VP, then an associate director. Every promotion came with a dinner. Every dinner came with a toast. And every toast was about him. His hard work. His late nights. His sacrifices. I clapped at everyone. I wore the dresses he picked out. I laughed at jokes made by people whose names I forgot the second we left the restaurant. And I never once said, "What about me?" Because here's the thing about being dismissed for long enough. You start to build something in the silence. Not out of revenge. Not at first. You build it because the silence is so loud that you need something to fill it. It started in 2020. Caleb had just turned 2. The world was locked down. Derek was working from the guest bedroom, which he'd claimed as his home office, without asking. I was in the kitchen with both kids, a laptop balanced on the counter between a sippy cup and a jar of peanut butter. A woman I'd gone to business school with, Natasha, called me out of nowhere. She was running a small logistics company in Raleigh, and she was drowning. Her operations were a mess. Her suppliers were ghosting her. Her margins were collapsing. She needed help, and she couldn't afford a big firm. "Vanessa, you are the smartest person in our program," she said. "Can you just look at my numbers? Just an hour. I'll pay you whatever I can." I looked at her numbers that night after the kids were in bed. Derek was asleep by 10. He always was. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a glass of water, and I went through Natasha's books line by line. By midnight, I'd found $340,000 in operational waste, redundant contracts, overlapping vendor agreements, a shipping route that was costing her 40% more than it should have because someone had set it up wrong 3 years ago and nobody had bothered to check. I sent her a 12-page report. She implemented every recommendation. Within 6 months, her company's net margin went from 4% to 11%. She told 2 people. Those 2 people told 4 more. And by the end of that year, I had 6 clients, a business name, and an LLC registered in North Carolina. I called the firm Ashworth Strategic Partners. Ashworth was my grandmother's maiden name. She'd run a seamstress shop in Baltimore for 40 years, raised 5 kids, buried a husband, and never once asked anyone for permission to work. I thought about her every time I opened my laptop at that kitchen table. The first year, I made $180,000. I didn't tell Derek. He wouldn't have understood. Not because he's stupid. Derek is actually very intelligent. He graduated near the top of his class. He reads the Wall Street Journal every morning. He can break down a balance sheet in 10 minutes. But intelligence and awareness aren't the same thing. Derek is the kind of man who can analyze a company's quarterly earnings but can't tell you what color the walls in his own living room are. He lives in a world where things happen around him, and unless they directly relate to his trajectory, they don't exist. I wasn't hiding from him. I was invisible to him. There's a difference. By 2022, Ashworth had 8 employees. I'd rented a small office space in a business park 20 minutes from our house. It was above a dentist's office. You could hear the drill through the floor on Tuesdays. But it was mine. The lease had my name on it. The electricity bill came to my email. Derek thought I'd joined a women's networking group that met a few times a week. He once said, "That's great, babe. Good for you to get out of the house." I smiled and said thank you. I was signing a $1.2 million contract that afternoon. There was one close call that year. September. Derek came home early because of a plumbing issue at the office. I was on a video call with a client in my car, parked in our driveway, because the Wi-Fi was better there than inside the house. He knocked on the window while I was mid-sentence about inventory optimization. I muted myself, rolled down the window, and said, "Just on a call with the networking group. Planning the next meetup." He nodded, said cool, and went inside. He didn't ask why a networking group needed a discussion about inventory optimization. He didn't ask why I was wearing a blazer in my own driveway. He didn't ask anything. He went inside and turned on ESPN. That night, I sat in bed next to him while he slept. His breathing was steady, familiar. I looked at the ceiling and thought about telling him. I rehearsed the words in my head. Derek, I started a company. It's doing well. I think you'd be proud of me. But then I imagined his response. Not anger. Not surprise. Something worse. I imagined him saying, "Oh, okay, that's nice." The same tone he used when I told him I'd rearranged the pantry. The same flat acknowledgement he gave to anything that existed outside his orbit. I decided the company deserved better than that response. I deserved better than that response. So I closed my eyes and went to sleep. My team grew. I hired a COO named Patricia, a former McKinsey consultant who'd left corporate life to raise her twins and was desperate to use her brain again. The first time she walked into our little office above the dentist, she looked around at the IKEA desks and the coffee maker with the cracked carafe and she said, "This is exactly where something great starts." I nearly cried. Nobody had ever called anything I'd done great. She became my closest ally. She handled operations. She handled vendors. She handled the 6 a.m. emails that would have eaten me alive. She also became the only person on earth who knew the full truth about my home life. One night, after a late strategy session, she said, "Vanessa, you're running a company while pretending to be unemployed. You know how insane that is, right?" I laughed. She didn't. I hired a director of operations named James, a guy who'd been passed over for partner at his old firm because he'd taken paternity leave, and apparently that was career suicide. I hired a data analyst named Sophia, who'd been let go during a merger and was told her role was redundant, which is corporate language for "we don't see value in what you do." I hired people who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed to the side. I knew what that felt like. Every single one of them was brilliant, and every single one of them came to work every day with something to prove. By 2023, we were doing $15 million in annual revenue. I'd moved the office to a larger space downtown. We had a receptionist, a conference room with glass walls, and a small kitchen with one of those espresso machines that sounds like a spaceship launching. My name was on the door. Not Vanessa Caldwell. Just V. Caldwell, founder and CEO. I liked the way it looked. Clean. Quiet. Like the work itself. I want to be clear about something. I didn't keep this from Derek as some kind of long game. I didn't wake up one morning and think, I'm going to build an empire in secret and then destroy him with a reveal. That's not how it happened. The secrecy grew the same way the business did, one day at a time. At first, I didn't mention it because it was small. Then I didn't mention it because I liked having something that was mine. Then I didn't mention it because so much time had passed that telling him would require a conversation I wasn't ready to have. And then I didn't mention it because I realized something that hurt more than anything else. He had never asked. Not once. In 4 years, Derek never said, "What did you do today?" Not in a way that expected a real answer. He'd come home, kiss me on the forehead, ask what was for dinner, and go change out of his suit. On weekends, he'd play golf or watch football or take the kids to the park for exactly 45 minutes before coming back and asking me if I needed anything from the store. He was a decent father, a functional husband, but he had no curiosity about my life. None. And after a while, I stopped expecting it. Now, let me tell you about the Christmas party. December 14th, 2024. Whitmore and Kessler's annual holiday event. It was at the Meridian Grand, this hotel downtown with marble floors and chandeliers the size of small cars. Derek had been talking about it for weeks. He'd bought a new tie. Navy blue. He kept adjusting it in the mirror like he was about to meet the president. "This is a big deal, Vanessa," he said while we were getting ready. "Craig Whitmore is going to be there. He never comes to these things. If I can get 5 minutes with him, this could change everything for me." I wore a black dress. Simple. Long sleeves. I'd bought it online for $85 and it fit perfectly, which felt like a small miracle. I didn't do anything special with my hair. I never do. Derek didn't notice either way. We drove to the hotel in his Audi. He talked the entire time about a pitch he'd been working on, something about a new client acquisition strategy. I listened. I nodded. I thought about the 3 emails sitting in my inbox from a Fortune 500 company that wanted to discuss a retainer. We walked in, and Derek immediately started working the room. That's what he called it. Working the room. He'd shake hands, laugh too loud at someone's joke, clap people on the back like they were old friends even if he'd met them 10 minutes ago. I stood next to him, holding a glass of white wine I hadn't sipped, smiling at people who looked through me. And then it happened. A group of 4 people walked over. 2 men, 2 women. All senior. You could tell by the watches and the confidence. One of the men, mid-50s, gray at the temples, extended his hand to Derek. Derek Caldwell, right? Associate Director? I've heard good things. Derek's face lit up like a stadium light. Yes, sir, that's me. Thank you. And this. He turned to me with that gesture, that open palm wave like he was presenting a product at a trade show. This is my wife, Vanessa. She stays home with the kids. He said it smiling. He meant it as a compliment. In his mind, he was showing these people that he was stable. Family man. Provider. He didn't see the way one of the women glanced at me with a flicker of something, recognition maybe, or confusion, before she quickly looked away. I smiled. Shook hands. Said nice to meet you. The group moved on. That was how it worked. That was how it always worked. I excused myself to get another drink. Not because I wanted one. Because I needed 2 minutes alone with the bartender's indifference. I stood at the bar, ordered a sparkling water, and stared at the ice cubes like they held the answers to questions I wasn't ready to ask. That's when I heard it. Excuse me. Are you Vanessa Caldwell? I turned. A man was standing behind me. Tall, early 60s, silver hair, impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He had the kind of posture that told you he'd never begged for anything in his life. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. There was a pin on his lapel. A small gold W with a diamond embedded in the curve. I knew that pin. Every senior partner at Whitmore and Kessler wore one. But this man wasn't a senior partner. The diamond meant something else. I'd seen it in the research I'd done 6 months ago when Whitmore and Kessler had come up as a potential referral source for one of my clients. This was Craig Whitmore, the founder. The man Derek had been desperate to meet for 3 years. I'm Craig, he said, extending his hand. Craig Whitmore. I know who you are, I said, shaking his hand. Vanessa Caldwell. I know who you are too, he said. And then he smiled in a way that made my stomach drop. Ma'am, we've been trying to get a meeting with you for 6 months. I didn't respond immediately. I just held his handshake and let the sentence sit in the air between us like smoke. 6 months. His firm had been reaching out through official channels. Emails to our general inbox. A call to Patricia, who had handled it with her usual grace, and told them we'd be in touch. I hadn't prioritized it. We were busy. Whitmore and Kessler wasn't our usual client profile. I'm sorry about that, I said. We've been stretched thin. Don't apologize, Craig said. I've seen what you've built. Ashworth Strategic Partners is doing what firms 10 times your size can't figure out. The Raleigh contract alone, the logistics overhaul you did, I showed that case study to my board. They couldn't believe a 14-person firm pulled that off. I felt the heat before I saw him. Derek had appeared at my elbow, his hand on the small of my back, that proprietary touch husbands do at parties when they see their wife talking to someone important. He was smiling, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. Why was Craig Whitmore talking to his wife? Mr. Whitmore, Derek said, stepping slightly in front of me. Derek Caldwell, Associate Director in the Advisory Division. It's an honor to finally meet you, sir. Craig looked at Derek, then back at me, then back at Derek. Your wife, Craig said slowly, is the founder of Ashworth Strategic Partners. We've been trying to get on her calendar since June. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I've ever heard. It was maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like the room had taken a breath and was holding it. Derek's face went through 4 expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, something that looked like fear, and then a smile so forced it could have cracked concrete. What? He said. His hand dropped from my back. Ashworth Strategic Partners, Craig repeated. Your wife's firm. $22 million in revenue last year? Operational restructuring? We want to bring her in to consult on our Southeast portfolio. We've got 14 underperforming branches and nobody internally has been able to crack it. Derek turned to me. His mouth was open slightly. His glass of bourbon was tilting in his hand, and I watched the liquid shift to the edge, and then, slowly, as if the universe had choreographed it, the glass slipped. It didn't shatter. It bounced off the carpet and rolled under a cocktail table, leaving a dark stain on the white cloth. Someone nearby gasped. A waiter appeared with a napkin. Derek didn't move. Vanessa, he said. Just my name. Like a question and an accusation at the same time. We should talk later, I said quietly. This isn't the place.
No, he said.
His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. What is he talking about? Craig seemed to realize he'd walked into something. He took a small step back. I apologize if I assumed you knew. He didn't, I said. Simply. No anger. No satisfaction. Just fact. The next 20 minutes were the strangest of my life. Derek excused himself to the bathroom and didn't come back for 12 minutes. I know because I counted. Craig and I talked business. He gave me his card, the real one, the one with his personal cell on the back. He told me he'd have his assistant reach out Monday morning. I told him I'd have Patricia set up a call. We shook hands again. He said, Your firm is the real deal, Vanessa. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I think he meant Derek. I think we both knew that. When Derek came back, his tie was loosened and his eyes were red. Not from crying. From something worse. From the kind of internal rearrangement that happens when the story you've been telling yourself about your life suddenly doesn't match the evidence. He stood next to me, but didn't touch me. He didn't speak to anyone else for the rest of the night. We left at 9:45. We drove home in complete silence. The Audi's engine was the only sound. Even the radio was off. When we pulled into the garage, he turned off the car but didn't unbuckle his seatbelt. How long? He said. For years. For years. He repeated it like he was tasting the words. And you never told me. You never asked. That sentence landed somewhere between us and stayed there. He opened his door, walked inside, and went straight to the guest bedroom. He closed the door without slamming it. Somehow that was worse. A slam would have been emotion. The quiet click was surrender. I went to the kitchen. I sat at the table, the same table where I'd built the entire company, and I poured myself a glass of water. The house was silent. Upstairs, Mila and Caleb were sleeping in their rooms, unaware that anything had shifted. The Christmas lights on the porch blinked through the window. Red, green, white. Red, green, white. Steady and repetitive. The way my life had looked from the outside for 10 years. Derek didn't come out the next morning until 11 a.m. The kids were watching cartoons. I was making pancakes. He walked into the kitchen wearing the same clothes from the night before, sat down at the island and said, I need you to explain everything.
So I did.
I told him about Natasha's phone call, about the 12-page report, about the first client, then the second, then the sixth, about the LLC, the office, the employees, about Patricia and James and the espresso machine, about the Fortune 500 emails and the $22 million. I spoke for 40 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he put his head in his hands and didn't move for a long time. Why didn't you tell me? He finally said. His voice was muffled by his palms. Because you introduced me as she stays home with the kids to 200 people, and not one part of you thought to wonder if there was more. He looked up. His eyes were wet. Not dramatically. Just damp around the edges, the way a man's eyes get when something hits a place he didn't know was soft. I did that, he said. Not a question. Every time, I said. For years. The weeks that followed were hard. Not in the way you'd expect. There were no screaming matches or thrown plates or ultimatums. It was quieter than that. Derek went through something I can only describe as recalibration. He started noticing things. The laptop I carried everywhere. The phone calls I'd take in the car. The The way I'd sometimes be typing at 11 p.m. with reading glasses on that he'd never seen before. All the evidence had been there. He just hadn't been looking. 3 days after the party, I came downstairs at 6:30 a.m. to find Derek sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. Not snooping. Just staring at the Ashworth website. Our team page. Our client testimonials. Our case studies. He'd been there long enough for the coffee to go cold in his mug. He didn't look up when I walked in. "You restructured a hospital supply chain in Tennessee," he said. His voice was flat, like he was reading a news article about a stranger.
Yes.
"Last March. And a manufacturing company in Virginia. 2 of them, actually." He closed the laptop slowly. "I sit in meetings all day and talk about client acquisition strategies. You actually do the thing I talk about doing." I didn't know what to say to that. So I made more coffee and scrambled eggs for the kids, and we ate breakfast in a silence that felt different from all the other silences we'd shared. This one had weight. This one had texture. The old silences had been empty. This one was full. The next week, Derek did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He asked me to sit down after the kids went to bed, and he listened. Not the polite, half-distracted listening he'd done before, where he'd nod while checking his phone. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd built the company, and he asked me questions. Real ones. How did you find your first office? What was the hardest year? Were you scared? What's the biggest contract you've ever lost? I talked for 2 hours. He didn't look at his phone once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I feel like I've been married to someone I've never met." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. He asked to see the office on a Saturday in January. I took him. He walked through the door and stopped when he saw the reception area. Our logo on the wall. A framed write-up from Charlotte Business Journal. The conference room where I'd closed a $3 million deal the previous month. Patricia's desk, organized with military precision. James's desk, covered in sticky notes and energy drink cans. The espresso machine humming softly in the kitchen. He stood in my office, looked at the view of the skyline, ran his fingers along the edge of my desk, and sat down in the chair across from it. Not my chair. The visitor's chair. He sat there for a while and didn't say anything. I watched him take in the framed photo on my desk, the one of Mila and Caleb at the beach last summer. He'd taken that photo. He recognized it. And something in his face shifted, like he was realizing for the first time that my life as a mother and my life as a CEO weren't separate worlds. They were the same woman. He just hadn't been paying attention. "This is yours," he said finally. "Yes." And I had no idea.
No.
He nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you, Vanessa. I know that might sound hollow right now, but I am." "It doesn't sound hollow," I said. "It sounds late."
He winced.
Not visibly, but I saw it behind his eyes. The way you flinch when something is true and you wish it wasn't. "We're still working on it. I won't pretend everything is fixed." Derek started therapy in February on his own, without me asking. He told me one night that his therapist had asked him to describe my daily routine, and he couldn't get past, "She drops the kids off at school." He said he sat there for 30 seconds in silence, and the therapist didn't fill it. She just let him sit with the emptiness of his own answer. He said it hit him like a truck. That he'd built an entire life with someone and had never once been curious about the hours she spent outside of his view. He said the therapist used the word invisible and that it made him nauseous because he knew it was true. He also told me something else from therapy that I think about often. His therapist asked him, "When your wife tells you about her day, what do you feel?" And he said, "I don't know. She doesn't usually tell me about her day." And the therapist said, "Has it occurred to you that maybe she stopped trying because you stopped asking?" He told me he drove home from that session and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes before coming inside. When he walked through the door, he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the MBA I put in a drawer. Not the housewife he introduced at parties.
Me.
The actual person standing in front of him, holding a dish towel, and asking if he wanted chicken or pasta for dinner. He walked over and hugged me and didn't say anything. He just held on. It was the first time in years that his touch didn't feel like an afterthought. We still live in the same house. We still eat dinner together, every night. But things are different. He asks me about my day now and waits for the answer. He stopped introducing me as his wife, who stays home with the kids. At his company's Valentine's Day event, someone asked me what I did, and before I could answer, Derek said, "She's the founder of Ashworth Strategic Partners. She's the smartest person I've ever met." He said it looking at me, not at them. The Whitmore and Kessler contract went through in late January. Patricia handled the initial meetings. She called me after the first one and said, "Vanessa, their Southeast operation is a disaster. This is going to be a massive project." I smiled. Disasters were our specialty. I flew to their Atlanta office in February and presented a restructuring plan for their Southeast branches. The presentation was 47 slides. I'd spent 3 weeks on it. I wore a gray suit I'd bought specifically for the meeting, and I remember looking at myself in the hotel mirror that morning and thinking, this is what it feels like to be exactly where you belong. Craig was in the room. So were 6 other senior partners. I stood at the head of a conference table that seated 20, and I walked them through every inefficiency, every redundant process, every dollar they were bleeding because nobody had looked at the system as a whole. When I finished, the room was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then Craig said, "How soon can you start?" He shook my hand afterward, the same firm handshake from the Christmas party, and said, "I knew you were worth the wait." The contract was worth $4.6 million. My biggest to date. I called Patricia from the elevator. She screamed so loud the people in the lobby looked up. That night in the hotel, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I cried. Not from sadness. Not from relief. From the sheer accumulation of every moment that had brought me to that conference room. Every night at the kitchen table. Every morning pretending I was just going to a networking group. Every time I'd heard, "She stays home with the kids," and swallowed the truth like a pill I couldn't let dissolve. It all came out at once, in a Holiday Inn Express in Atlanta, sitting on a bed with scratchy white sheets and a view of the parking lot. I let myself feel it for about 10 minutes. Then I washed my face, ordered room service, and started reviewing the implementation timeline for the next day. On the drive home from the airport, Derek picked me up. He was waiting at arrivals with Mila and Caleb. Mila had made a sign that said, "Welcome home, Mom," in purple marker. She'd drawn stars around the words and colored them in with what appeared to be every crayon she owned. Caleb was holding a juice box and waving with the wrong hand, the way 6-year-olds do when they're excited and haven't figured out coordination yet. Derek opened my door, took my bag, and said, "How'd it go?" "Good," I said. $4.6 million. He blinked. Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere honest. The kind that fills a car and doesn't need a follow-up. "I married way out of my league," he said. I looked at him. At the man who'd introduced me as a housewife to a room full of strangers. At the man who'd never once asked what I did between 9 and 3. At the man who'd spent 10 years talking about his own career at dinner tables while I sat across from him building something bigger in silence. At the man who was now standing in an airport parking lot, holding my bag, telling me he was outmatched. And I thought about all the women who sit at kitchen tables after everyone else is asleep, building things no one knows about, not because they're hiding, but because no one thinks to look. I thought about my grandmother, Ashworth, in her seamstress shop in Baltimore. Pins in her mouth, measuring tape around her neck, sewing dresses for women who could afford to go places she never would. She never called herself a businesswoman. She never called herself anything. She just showed up every day and did the work. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. "You didn't marry out of your league," I said. "You just didn't read my stats." He carried my bag to the car. Mila told me about a spelling test she'd aced. She spelled extraordinary correctly and wanted me to know about it 3 separate times. Caleb spilled his juice box on the seat, which was so predictable it almost felt scripted. The Honda Pilot smelled like goldfish crackers and hand sanitizer, the way it always does. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email from Craig's assistant, confirming the start date. I didn't check it. It could wait. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. Except now he knew. And knowing changed everything. Not because the money was different or the house was different or the kids were different, but because for the first time in 10 years I wasn't standing behind someone. I was standing next to him. And he could finally see me. Last week, I had lunch with Patricia at the office. We sat in the conference room eating salads from the place on the corner that always forgets the dressing. She asked me if things at home were better. I told her they were. She asked if Derek was different. I said yes, but that the real change wasn't in him. It was in me. For years, I'd been performing invisibility. I'd been so used to not being seen that I'd started to wonder if maybe I wasn't worth seeing. Building Ashworth proved me wrong. But Derek finding out about Ashworth didn't just change his understanding of me. It changed my understanding of what I was willing to accept. I don't fold myself into the background anymore. Not at parties. Not at dinners. Not anywhere. I stand where I stand and take up exactly the amount of space I need, which turns out to be more than I thought. The espresso machine at the office still sounds like a spaceship. Patricia still sends me reports at 6 a.m. Sophia just closed her first solo client. James brought donuts on Friday for no reason. Craig Whitmore still calls me ma'am. And every morning after I drop the kids off at school, after I wave goodbye to Mila and watch Caleb run toward the building with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, I drive to a building with my name on the door, sit in a chair that's mine, and build something real. Nobody introduced me. I introduced myself. And that made all the difference.